You've tuned in to the most crazy rocking metal podcast on the air. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metal from the Inside.
Hey everybody, Sydney Taylor here. Welcome back to the Metal from the Inside podcast. And joining me, I have a very special guest, Mr. Andy Black, or Mr. Andy Biersack of Black Veil Brides. How you doing today, Andy?
I'm doing great. Any name is fine. I've got so many of them.
I was wondering, I was like, oh gosh, does he prefer Andy Black or Andy Biersack? But I know you go by both. So I'm so happy that you're joining me today here in the podcast. And congratulations, first off, on the new record that came out back at the end of October.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, we're really excited. There's been a really positive response to it so far. So excited to be touring it and getting back out in March. And yeah, it's been a blast.
Yeah, so I know that was the first record in about 3 years. The last one released back in 2018, Veil, that was released a couple years back. When did the process for this new record start? Was it during the pandemic? Was it post-pandemic, before? When did that kind of all start to come together for this new record?
I think we wrote Scarlet Cross on January 6th, 2020.
Okay.
And we did Blackbird and then Fields of Bone, and we were kind of getting in a rhythm. And then our intention was to go on tour for the bulk of 2020, and then we would get back to the record. We'd gotten about what we thought was maybe like, a third of the way through or something in terms of just the writing process. And then we would come back and write more and, kind of figure it out more piecemeal. And then we did one show. We went down to Mexico City and played the first show of the tour, and then came back and, you'll never guess what happened. Anyway, we were then presented with the opportunity to kind of just say, okay, well then let's just make this record and let's spend the year or however long it's going to be. Back then it was, we might have 3 extra months. And then it was 6 extra months. And now, it kept moving back and back. So it was just an opportunity to really spend time and be very detail oriented on making the record, which is kind of a rare and unique thing. For the most part in your career, after your first record or two, if it succeeds, the expectation is that you'll just keep making more records. So what you're supposed to do between making those records is go on tour. So then your life just becomes tour, make a record, tour that record, then come back, make another record. We have very limited experiences outside of just making albums. And in this instance, not only did we have multiple years where we weren't active as a band, we also had this whole wild experience we were going through just globally. So it was able to inform the situation a lot more.
Right. I was going to ask, how did that affect the writing and, the lyrics and the songs that you were creating? Because, like so many, it's a time that none of us have ever gone through before.
Sure.
And I'm sure that, in some way, being even the situation of maybe being quarantined and all that, did that at all affect the way that the record came out or how you were approaching the record at that point?
I think initially we didn't think so because, as I said, we had written so much material prior to this kind of starting. But as things went along, I think it would be impossible to not have some level of what was going on in the world not creep into what you're doing. When your only place that you go is to a studio and you're all wearing masks and gloves all day, and then you go back home and like all this stuff that's, it became commonplace, so you get used to it. But those things find a way of sneaking their way into what you're doing. It's just the reality of life. If you're writing about honest, genuine experiences, even if you're trying to siphon them through to the story or narrative perspective, the reality of what life is generally takes over everything else.
And you mentioned that you guys, played a couple shows then. Of course, you finished this record, The Phantom Tomorrow, by the way. I'm not sure if I said the title, Phantom Tomorrow. And that was released at the end of October. And so we've kind of seen the beginning of live shows start to come back, this summer and into the fall. And what was it like for you guys? Because I know that, a lot of artists who released albums during the pandemic, unfortunately weren't able to tour or if they had plans, but, you guys planned it out in a way where you were able to get out there and tour pretty much immediately after the album release. So what was it like for you guys to get on tour and start to play those songs live for the first time?
Truth be told, it was kind of I don't want to say an accident, but we kind of ended up in a situation where we were initially going to put the record out in, I believe, May. And ultimately we were told that it couldn't be done, that the production was so delayed that we wouldn't have been able to get vinyl records made or CDs. The comic book wouldn't have been able to be done. In many cases, the supply chain wouldn't have allowed for us to have merchandise or any of the things that come around the release of a record. It basically would have been a digital only release. And for this record, with the amount of kind of other stuff that's around it when it comes to the narrative and the concept and everything behind it, it felt like it would have been kind of underselling the record to not release it properly. So we found this out and we said, okay, well, when can we put it out? And it just so happens that we had been committed to this tour within this moment, this co-headline tour that we were going to do. And it just kept getting moved down the road. And so eventually we found out, well, it looks like they're going to want to do it in the fall. Let's, Live Nation, everybody else is saying, let's do it in the fall. So we said, well, we happen to have this release date that we got told they can make the records by then. So why don't we put it out then? And it really became kind of a fortunate thing for us, because as weird as it was to be on tour and the restrictions and everything else, and you kind of get used to those things, it really was a very, normal, for lack of a better term, release situation where we went on tour. We were on tour for about a month, then our record came out, then we did about a month of touring after it, and now we're home for a little bit, and then we're going to go back out. Like, this whole cycle feels like generally every other cycle that we've done for the past 13 years.
That's an interesting perspective. I haven't heard a lot of people look at it that way, mostly just because, it's like, oh, they were kind of banned for a little bit there, no large gatherings. And so it felt like, it wasn't even, allowed. But
Yeah.
it is really interesting to look at it that way of, we've gone off tour before, we focused on writing before, this is no different of doing that and then coming back to live shows when it's safe. So that's a really interesting way to look at it. I admire your positivity.
It's just timing worked out for us that way.
Yeah.
We had already intended on making a record, and we were
Right.
already basically inactive for several years at that point. So for us, it was more about doing it right, and we just happened to be given, I hate to say that what has occurred was a positive in any way, but for us, the silver lining was we were allowed to kind of make this record, and then when we were able to tour it, it's about the time that we would have toured it anyway.
Right. I mean, you have to look at the positives, right? I mean, we were given this set of cards, so it's like you got to look at it in any way you can.
Sure, but I mean, the truth of the matter is it's still deeply affecting the touring industry, and you're seeing tours get postponed and shows get canceled on every level every day still. So while we were successful in getting through the tour, we still had, our drummer CC got COVID, and we had to change. We had to start doing acoustic only shows. We had to cancel a few shows, and there was an instance of COVID in this Moments camp, and even on our tour, it wasn't immune, and we were able to get through it. And there's a lot of large scale tours that are just getting outright postponed or canceled. So it's still a very different world. I think it's just about how we all figure out a way to navigate it.
Going back a little bit to in the middle of the pandemic and there being no shows, I know you guys did a couple live stream gigs and everything back like in June of 2020, right when kind of everything was we were in the thick of it. Was it weird doing live stream shows for you guys, or was it just, because there's no audience, it's, to his camera, that's broadcasting, or was it kind of just, we went out there, we do the same thing we always do, and it didn't really feel too different?
It's certainly different, but it also is like you treat it differently. I think if I were to go out there thinking it was going to be a regular show, I probably would have been pretty surprised when I came out to just cameras and nobody in there. But when you think of it like, in some ways, like a live music video, well, we've made a million music videos. This wasn't dissimilar. There's multiple cameras. The only difference is instead of playing along to a track, we're actually playing these songs. So, I think we had to have a different mindset about it. And we did really enjoy the opportunity to at least get together and perform. And, we were able to see, fans in parts of the world that we have never been able to tour in and maybe someday would never be able to get to. We're able to see our live show in a way that they weren't before. And so again, you try to find the silver linings in these situations, and that was certainly one.
I want to get back to the Phantom Tomorrow a little bit, and just the overall concept of it, because it is a concept record, which is really interesting, and in a way is kind of unlike anything that you guys have done before. Where did this come from? What sparked this? Because like I mentioned, it is a concept record, and it is based off a little bit of it's like a villain origin story, correct?
Yeah.
It's comic book based. So tell us a little bit about how that came to fruition.
Well, I've always loved comic books. I've always loved the idea of hero creation and what creates a hero and what is a hero. And so the idea was to try to kind of build an origin story based not on this kind of good versus evil thing, and more so based on the kind of I suppose, the fragility of heroes in general, and the idea of building somebody up as being better than you and somehow a source of inspiration, and sometimes neglecting your own, I guess, personality traits, or what makes you heroic, or what makes you a good person or good to be around or positive for your family or friends. And so that was really kind of the jumping off point. And then, at the end of the day, all of us who make music, who have been successful enough to be able to have an audience, we are placed with responsibilities that I don't take lightly, none of us do, which is that our music has impacted people in many ways. And they come to us and say, hey, I was going through XYZ in my life, and this song got me out of that place. And so with that comes a level of responsibility. So I wanted to be able to talk about that as well. The idea that, I'm certainly not some heroic beacon of virtuosity and perfection, but if something that I've written can be important to you, then use that as a tool. It's not about me being somehow this golden god of rock stardom. It's about how elements of what we have done and many other bands have done informed you, the listener, in some way and helped you, but ultimately you're the one who is saving yourself in these situations.
And it's so true. I've heard me myself being a music fan, and I know that you are too, which I want to get into a little bit later about your history as a fan and how you kind of grew up with music. But it's so true how much songs can affect you and music can affect you. And does it kind of just shock you sometimes in a good way, of just a kind of like a pinch me moment when people come up to you and say things like that to you, like, your music has helped save my life or help me out of a bad place? Does it still, after all these years, kind of affect you in a way?
Certainly, and people will say things that are um, deeply important to their lives, informative moments in their lives that were impacted by a song that, I wrote when I was 19 years old. That's a crazy thing when you see people with tattoos, or you see people who, their relationship, they met because of their shared fandom of what you made. It's a really humbling thing, and I think it's important for anybody that's put in that position to be able to keep perspective and understand that this is this is not a thing that you are owed. This is not a thing that you deserve. It's a thing that you worked for, and it's a thing you're very fortunate to have. And to try to be able to communicate that directly with an audience and go, I appreciate what you have given me, and I hope to give you something, I think is kind of the most important part of this.
Like I mentioned, I did want to get into your kind of background as a music fan, because I know you're into a lot of, for lack of a better term, kind of the 80s metal, the Motley Crues, the Wasps, those are all of my favorite bands too. It's what
Okay.
I primarily interview. Like, I've had Dee Snider on the podcast, Alice Cooper, and everything. So
Oh, two of the best.
yes,
D is one of my favorite people in the world. He's just wonderful.
he was amazing. I had him on, and Alice is my personal hero, so I've had him on too. And I loved, doing some just research on you and everything, preparing for this. I've also known, just following the band, how much you love that kind of music and everything. And I wanted to tell you this too really quick. When I was first finding your band, and I knew about you, but my parents are really big rock fans. And back when music choice was still a big thing on TV.
Sure, the station that you could listen to songs.
Yeah, the station could listen to songs, and it was like the advent before really like a lot of YouTube did it with music videos. I remember my parents telling me, they came to me about it, and they said, we came across this band, it's Black Veil Brides, and they have this really great like Motley Crue. They're like a modern day Motley Crue. And I was like, yeah, I've listened to them, and my friends listened to them and everything. So did you get that comparison a lot in the early days, or is that kind of a unique one?
Oh, no, certainly. I mean, that's, and in many ways, we were aping a lot of that stuff and enjoying it and having fun with it. I think as you grow, you start to kind of find your own ways of expressing the theatricality. But it was no secret that was a big influence. And then we were lucky enough to get to tour with Motley and get to know Nikki over the years, and get to know Alice and Dee and Sebastian Bach, and all these people that were really important to us ended up being in our corner and performing with us and helping get our name out there and stuff. So it was definitely a really important element, was being able to try to in some way bring back that spectacle and that show of rock, and being a young band in LA when this was just at the kind of tail end of the Sunset Strip kind of being a thing. Now you go down there and it's mostly all the clubs are gone, really. You know, the whiskey's still there and the rainbow's still there, but it's mostly hotels. But we got in just before that kind of all really faded away, and we kind of became, in some ways, the new kind of the young kids that were kind of bringing it back. And we'd walk down to the rainbow or whatever, and all these, old school legends would be there, and they would know our name, and they'd be excited that we were around. And like I said, well, that's Dee Snider, performing on stage with us, or Nikki Sixx sitting me down to give me career advice, or going to rehearsal and suddenly Sebastian Bach runs into our room while we're performing. There was just this like thing around the band in the early days that a lot of the guys from that era really were excited that we were kind of bringing that stuff back.
How did you at first get into that kind of music? If I remember correctly, your dad was a musician, he was into a lot of that stuff, but how did it kind of get passed on to you to the point where you found yourself really getting deep into it?
Yeah, I mean, it really stems from my dad. As a kid, there was kind of just two things that we always connected on and spent all of our time together doing, which was music, going to concerts, him introducing me to bands, going to music stores, record stores, and sports. And so those two things. And then we would I played hockey, he would drive me to hockey practice. And on the way, we'd have a mixtape that had, Dio on it or whatever it is. And I would listen to these songs and learn about these bands. And it kind of all went hand in hand. And I'm an only child. And so, I have a really close relationship with both my parents, but so much of my youth was spent just with me and my dad driving to practice or the record store or whatever else, listening to music and learning about these bands. And then he'd get me VHS tapes and I would watch them, and I'd sit and spend hours every day studying the way that Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley answer questions in interviews and stage moves. And I'd dress up every day after school and try to figure out what my costume on stage would be. And it was just a big part of my childhood and something that has really stuck with me through the years.
What was it like for you just as a kid during that time of listening to that music, or an early teenager? Because I don't know about you, but I was the same way. And I remember in high school, people would look at me and be like, I said Alice Cooper's my favorite, and they'd be like, who is she? I'd get all these weird
Sure.
looks and, all this stuff of, I have no idea what the hell you're into, but, it's weird.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wrote about this in my book a little bit, where one of the most distinct things I have from my childhood is, every major city has a Kiss 107 or Kiss 102. There, all of the pop stations on Clear Channel around like the late 90s all became called like Kiss something. So I'd say that my favorite band was Kiss, and the other kids would think I was talking about the top 40 like radio station, and they'd be like, no, like that's a bunch of different artists. What's your favorite band? And it was like a Who's on First bit that would happen with me and the other 8-year-old.
That's funny. Yeah, it's so crazy how, and especially probably at that time too, the early 90s, and the mid 90s when you were growing up, of, it was just when kind of that metal was fading out and grunge was coming
Sure.
in, and then it was, the 80s had a little bit of a revival there at the 90s, and then again in the early 2000s, of course, when Black Veil Brides was getting their start and everything. So how did that carry, that kind of uniqueness that you saw even just in school and loving that music kind of carry into the creation of the band and what was brought into it from that?
Well, I think you always kind of go for the things you loved growing up when you first start. I think that especially when you're very young, like I was when we started the band, the things that were important to me, the things that, as you say, isolated me from other kids, I wanted to be able to find my own version of them, and how I could in 2010 or 2009 or whenever be like, hey, this is a version along with the other influences I had, whether they were mostly punk rock bands like the Misfits and Alkaline Trio and AFI, combining that stuff with, the guitar heavy rock of Metallica and Megadeth, with the visuals of bands like Wasp and Alice Cooper and Motley Crue and Kiss. Like, it just seemed like, boy, this would be the best fucking band in the world if I could just make all this stuff. Because for me, I've always said that the goal is always to be in your favorite band. Like I know a lot of artists are very deferential to other bands, and they feel like it's maybe egotistical to say that your favorite band is the band you're in. But I think if you don't feel that way, then you're not doing it right. Like if what you should strive to is to create something that you've always wanted to have exist in the zeitgeist. And to me, that's what Black Veil Brides is. It's the band that as a little kid, it's like what do you see those memes all the time, like what would be the ultimate quarterback, or what would be the ultimate thing, or whatever, and then they combine a bunch of stuff. To me, this band is, as an 8-year-old, if I was drawing out what my favorite band would be, it would be all the stuff that I am now getting to do as an adult for a living.
And what was it about the theatrics? You talk about Kiss, you talk about Wasp, a lot of those bands, and how you brought that into Black Veil Brides. What was it about the theatrics for you that really drew you in and, went, I want to do something like that?
I don't know. Just some stuff appeals to you where you go, like, that's me. I remember as a little kid seeing Batman and thinking, oh, I want to be Batman. Seeing Sting in the early 90s and late 90s in WCW as with the crow makeup and everything, and being like, oh, I want to be that guy. Different characters and iconography. I mean, there's a reason why I'm a 31-year-old man who just wears tight black clothes and leather jackets every day. Like there was a defined aesthetic that just clicked with me when I was a real little kid, and I just said, like, that's everything I want to be. That's it. I'm going to do that. That's whatever that is. That's going to be me for my whole life.
And it's really interesting too, watching the band evolve over the years. Like we mentioned, you guys started out, very, Motley Crue-esque, and it was a lot of makeup and a lot of, stage wear and all that stuff. And you do still, have the makeup going on, and you have, you got on stage and you have kind of the war paint and everything. But it's interesting watching you guys evolve from that to a little bit, of a different version of you guys. Has that just been like just a natural evolution for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the time that as soon as you start feeling like you're a caricature of yourself, it's time to change things. And eventually, from 2009 to 2013, the body paint and the giant hair and all that stuff started to feel less like something we actively wanted to do and more like something that was expected. And it's a lot less fun to go out and do something that's expected. In 2009, doing it, nobody expected it. And it was new to us. So we were experimenting and having fun with different things. So then it's really just all about the pursuit of doing something that entertains you first and foremost. So if you're on tour for 90 days and you're exhausted and you're sitting backstage and the idea of putting head to toe body paint all over yourself makes sense, then do it. That's great. If the inverse is true and you go, you know what, I think maybe tonight I'm not going to do that, then at that point it feels like you've kind of broken free from what the initial vision is, and so you have to alter it and you have to move on. But it also just comes down to, it's fun to change stuff up. It's fun for every record cycle to do something different. And at the end of the day, rock and roll and all this is about having fun and enjoying what you're doing, and getting to draw suits and clothes and outfit ideas and get them made and different makeup things and hair and all, like, that's just fun for me.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's been a really cool evolution seeing that and seeing where you guys have, come from and where you guys have gone, and what might be coming in the future. Something that I've always just been curious about from a perspective of a musician that was in this time and sometimes is often referred to it. Do you find when people say like that, like they're in their like emo phase, or like Black Veil Brides was like an emo band, does that bug you personally? I've always just wondered this because some of your fans have also said, like, it's my like emo past, or it was like, phase of my life. And I've always just wondered if that to you guys, just because it was that era of music, and to me it's rock and roll, but it's just the era and the time that you guys came out and got big. I've always wondered if for you guys it felt like it was a derogatory term.
When I was in high school, it was, because I didn't want anything to do with the kind of shoegazing bands. And it meant a very different thing when I was in high school. I remember thinking, oh, I'm not part of that. Like, I don't listen to those bands. But my image was one that I started to kind of fall into a lot of those, what is now referred to as like scene bands.
Yes.
As I got older and our audience gravitated towards us, and many of whom were interested in those other bands, it became less about, oh, who am I associated with, and more just about, I'm so happy that what we do has found an audience and it resonates with them.
Right.
So, the other thing is, sometimes people have difficulty with the idea that when we first started, first of all, I was essentially the same age as most of our audience. I was a teenager, and so were a lot of our fans. As we have grown, so has the audience, and many people struggle with, as they get older, retaining interest in things that they had when they were really young. And sometimes people like to be, they like to kind of make fun of their past and go like, oh, when I was a teenager, I liked all this dumb stuff, because it makes them feel maybe more like they're an adult now. And I think that this is also true of people who were in their like early 20s a lot of the time, where you're just only slightly removed from your teens, but you feel so different. So it's important to let everybody know you're not a teenager anymore. So you can be very vocal and let everybody know, well, I don't like that stuff I used to like when I was a kid, even though when you were a kid was 3 years ago. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's an important, and I think it's a universal part of growing up where there's this kind of ebb and flow where you go, when you're young, you're into this stuff, and then a lot of people, when you get older, you go, I don't like that anymore. That's when I was younger. And then as you get older, you go, oh, I really love that stuff, you know. And I think even for me, there were phases in my life and fandom where, when I was really young, I was heavily interested in. We'll go with a different thing. The Cincinnati Bengals football team, right? We had season tickets. I went every game. I loved it. And then around the time that I was like 16, 17, 18, I kind of started to be like, well, I don't, I'm a guy on tour. Like, I don't need to pay attention to that stuff. And then as I got a little bit older, by my mid 20s, I was like full on back into the fandom. And I was like, why did I miss those years? I could have been watching these games and having fun. So I think it's just part of life. It certainly doesn't offend me. I think that if we are lucky enough to be considered, professional figure skater band, like whatever you want to call it, I don't give a shit really about what title it is. If even one person likes what you do and allows you to do it professionally, that's a win. So you can call us whatever you want. And it doesn't bother me if people go, oh, I used to love you when I was younger. Well, fine, great. I'm glad that at some point in your life, the art had an impact on you. Maybe it doesn't anymore, but at least we were there for you in a time, and at least you were there for us to give us a shot.
I'm sure, though, you're also probably starting to see a lot of those people that you just described coming back. And
I mean, it's been really interesting with the tour that we just did. Was the most varied in age, I think, a tour we've ever done, because we've been away for a few years.
Right.
And so you're looking out and seeing older people who are into the classic rock part of it and are really into like the bands that we've discussed, who are there to see Black Veil for that reason. You've got people who are about my age who we were their favorite band when they were younger and they never got to see us in concerts, and now they're finally coming to see the show and they get to sing Knives and Pens with us live and the whole thing. And then there's really young kids who maybe their older sibling had a Black Veil record and that's how they found it, or they saw a video of me on TikTok or something. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have a TikTok, but apparently I have a presence there. But I those are the types of things where it really, it's fun to look out on an audience and see this like 3 generations of people for a band that's really only been around for a little over a decade. The changes that have occurred in people's lives and the fact that so many people have stuck with us is made evident by the fact that, this tour that we're doing with Motionless and Ice Nine Kills, those are 2 bands that we're all from the same era, so to speak.
Right.
And, we're playing the Hollywood Palladium, which is a massive venue in Hollywood. It's sold out in an hour. You know what I mean? Like it's a testament to the fact that there's a staying power to what this is beyond just, oh, that was the thing I liked when I was a teenager.
Yeah. And that must be just so cool, like you said, to see people, kids that are younger who are going back into that music and are just already, finding it. And I mean, for you to like have somebody, say, or see a young kid come up and go, this is my first Black Veil Brides concert, or they're coming there with, their dad, or their, because at this point, your original fans are old enough now to have kids,
Yeah.
And so
without a doubt, every time we do VIP meet and greets or anything like that, you're seeing such a wide swath of people in terms of age range and interest or introductory point. You'll have people who they discovered us from playing a video game where one of our songs was in it, or one of our songs being in WWE, or me being on Nikki Sixx's radio show. Like all these different points of emphasis or ways that people found it. It's just fascinating, and it's a testament to, while the mainstream continues to ignore or pretend that hard rock and this kind of music doesn't exist, the heartbeat of this is just as strong as it's ever been. It just exists on a different plane.
I wanted to talk to you about the tour you mentioned with Motionless in White and Ice Nine Kills that was just announced, I think, about a week ago. How did that come together? Have you played a lot of shows with either of those bands, or did it kind of just all fall together, kind of like you mentioned, because, you are from a lot of, the same era and everything?
Well, us and Motionless toured together about almost 12 years ago now. And we had always talked about doing another tour, and just schedules never aligned. And we always thought it would be a good thing. And then Ice Nine Kills is a band that's been around for quite some time. And, we had known each other socially, and they've just really just blown up over the last couple of years and are doing such a great job that we felt like, wow, wouldn't it be great to have these 3 bands that represent different parts of this same kind of scene. You know, our music is all three bands that make very different music at very different levels of theatricality, but there is a through line to all of it that I think there's a lot of similar fans of each band.
Is there a specific city or spot or venue that you're looking forward to playing again that you haven't played since before the pandemic or even longer than that?
Well, you know, again, I went to see, when I first moved to LA, I went to see Rob Zombie at the Palladium in Hollywood, and I remember thinking, I want to play here one day. And this will be the first time ever that we'll be playing that show and then headlining a show at a venue that, you know, when I was 17, 18 years old, I was going like, oh, I'm going to play here one day. And now to get to do that all these years later for the first time is a really, really huge thing.
It's amazing that you're still checking stuff off, you know, your bucket list, you know, over a decade after the band started like that. You know, that's insane. I can't even imagine how.
I mean, that's the goal, right? It's not,
Yeah.
you always want to keep checking stuff off the list and not go,
Yeah.
oh, you're going this way and being the things that you used to do. So
Yeah.
eventually that comes for us all. So I'm very lucky that at this point we still get to do new stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to you guys are coming to Philly and I will be there. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the show and seeing you guys. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on and chat.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. And the Phantom Tomorrow Part 2 will be out hopefully next year. So you guys can look forward to that.